the True Objective Podcast with Objectivist girl Lauren Rumpler and Liberty.me writer Calvin Thompson. The True Objective Podcast, dispelling myths about our society. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the True Objective Podcast with your host, Objectivist girl Lauren Rumpler and Calvin Thompson from Liberty.me. And today, guys, we have a very special guest. We have Jason Burak here with us from Wall Street for Main Street. Say hi, Jason.
Hi, Jason.
So Jason and I have kind of become friends over the last few months, and we've been talking online about some investing stuff because he shows all about, investing and being smart with your money and awesome stuff, and it's a gold mine for knowledge, and you guys really should check it out. It's a great show. And so Jason agreed to come on the show, and so we are talking about the history of money over again. This is our fourth episode of it, and the fourth episode total. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with Calvin. You want to talk to us about the freak fact that we found out?
I guess so. Okay, so in the 16th century, Count Hieronymus Schlick of Bohemia started minting coins known as Jacobsthalers from the German Thal or valley, which is basically the equivalent of Dale in English. And these coins were called, as I said, Jacobstahl, which became Thaler. It was gradually shortened and eventually became dollar, or daler in Swedish and Dutch, Thaler in Hungarian, Talero in Italian, all that good stuff. So basically, all our terms for modern currency came from this one place in Germany where silver was minted.
That's really interesting. So basically, the English dollar came from this crazy, unpronounceable currencies. I mean,
it's hard to pronounce about Jacobstaler. It just rolls off the tongue.
Jacobstaler. What do you think, Jason? Is Jacobstaler easy to say?
No, it's funny, but what I learned about that was, I guess, then that went to Spain because I thought the U.S. dollar was based off the Spanish milled dollar. So I guess maybe the Spanish probably copied the Germans, but it doesn't surprise me because the whole use of money as a store of value, I mean, like it made a lot of sense from a market efficiency standpoint, because if you go back and look at the history of money, I mean, money started, there wasn't originally money, it was just barter. And it was incredibly inefficient.
And actually, before that it was gift culture. So a lot of people don't know it's actually started with gift culture, and then it moved into barter.
Yeah, it went at gift culture, barter. There was also credit, too. So if you had a business, you could give me credit, but there was really, you were keeping your own tallies, and you would have to go after me. So if I left the town, it would be very difficult for you to get any kind of rebate or repurchasing of getting your money back or trading goods or anything like that. So it was an incredibly inefficient system. I mean, all these things worked for a while. People still traded. I mean, there's evidence of trade, 10,000 years ago, a lot longer than people thought. I think they unthawed a cave guy during the Ice Age recently, and they found that he had shoes and other closed goods that were from, many thousands of miles away that he had gotten in trade. And it's just amazing, though, that, people can make amazing things through trade, and everyone gains through trade. And unfortunately, the system we have now, it's just it's just based off corrupt rent-seeking behavior, to use an economics term, where people really aren't trading their hard work and goods or services for other goods or services right now.
Yes, definitely. Spoken like a true libertarian. So yeah, I mean, that's I think that no matter what currency goes out, barter will always be alive. Barter is always going to be a thing. And I think it's great. I mean, there's a lot of different libertarian festivals that you can go to, and you can barter, which is really cool. I mean, you can use gold or silver or Bitcoin, but you can also barter, which is really awesome. And you can barter time. Time is a really valuable commodity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. At the individual level, at the microeconomic level, not big picture, the whole economy, but person to person, you can do that. I don't see anything wrong with that. But I mean, for the whole economy to be doing on that, there's just so much specialization, Lauren. There's so many people working different jobs that it would be very tough to figure out, to negotiate trade. Oh, I have this that I could barter, and figuring out thousands of different people who are willing to trade one thing for another without money as the medium of exchange. It's just at a much larger, the levels of the economy that we have with specialization and how large the economy has gotten. At the large level, it's just impossible to do barter except at a small level now.
Agreed. I think that currency definitely makes the movement of goods a lot easier. And one of the things that made that money really great, the U.S. dollar, really great, was that it was backed by gold. And so the next thing that we looked into was in 1933, FDR signed the Gold Reserve Act, which banned gold as a currency except as foreign exchange, and banned ownership of significant amounts of gold. And gold was valued at $35 per ounce, which was a premium. It cornered the gold market. And so a lot of people think that the FDR was actually the person that ended the gold standard, but it was actually Nixon who severed the final ties between gold and the U.S. dollar in 1971. So I thought that was really interesting, was studying that stuff. And what do you think of us leaving the gold standard, Calvin?
Well,
Lord, just the last bad idea in a long, sad history of bad ideas as far as American money.
No kidding. Jason, what do you think?
Well, a little backstory on that first. Like you're right, the gold standard wasn't completely removed overnight. It was taken apart piece by piece. It actually started even before 1933. You had the gold exchange standard basically after World War I, because the governments were so bankrupt that they didn't have the gold and they needed to print money. So they started using paper dollars and British pounds that were unbacked. I mean, the gold standard, the whole thing about it is it's supposed to prevent the politicians from printing money, from drastically growing government, because if they have a war, right, normally in the past, if you go back through financial history, whenever there's a war, and I'm a history major, that's one of my original backgrounds, is you go back and look through like Venetian history, and whenever they wanted to have a war, they went to the richest people in Venice and they had to melt down their gold or silverware, and they had to pay that as tribute to start the war. So governments didn't want to do that. They didn't want to harass the people. Most people didn't want to give up their wealth for a war that they may or may not have agreed with. So the governments just said, you know what? Well, we want to get off this gold standard here because it's really preventing us from doing all the things, all these crazy agenda stuff that we want to do, and from world domination or all these other plans that we got from bribing our people and things. So,
wow.
Obviously a gold standard would have prevented a lot of this other stuff, and 1971 was the last vestiges of it. But yeah, they've been wanting to get rid of the people who have been running things, the central bankers, the central planners, the Keynesians. They've been wanting to get rid of things for a lot longer than 1971 or even 1933.
Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that about the war. That was really, really insightful. I didn't find that in any of my research, so I'm really glad we have you on the show. Yeah, so I mean, there was the war stuff, and then FDR, and then Nixon, and I'm sorry, Jason.
Sorry to interrupt you. There's a book by Jacques Rueff, who was a central banker at the Bank of France, and he actually he was a young man during World War I, and he was the guy who referred Charles de Gaulle in 1971, well before 1971, to start calling in all the gold for France, and that's when Nixon severed the ties. So Jacques Rueff had seen the gold standard, be picked apart piece by piece by piece. And the book out there, it's free. I think it's on a whole bunch of websites right now for your listeners. It's called The Age of Inflation. And it's just basically the memoirs of a central banker talking about how the gold exchange standard was a fake gold standard and how it was hardcore inflationary. I mean, even on a gold standard, Lauren, governments can still cheat on it. I mean, it's harder to cheat, but they can still cheat. They can lie and say, we have 30 million ounces of gold in the vault, right? When they really have 5 million ounces. Yeah. And then they print a whole bunch of paper money. So, I mean, it's harder for them to cheat, but they can still cheat.
Yeah, we actually talked about that on the last show, that they were hiding how much they were saying, they were being, obviously they were saying how much they had printed that was backed by gold, but they were also printing some on the side. So I mean, yeah, we talked about that the last show, which I found really interesting.
And they even did that exactly, and they even did that with metal too. I mean, go back and look through the Roman Empire, right? Look at coin clipping. I was just up in Toronto.
Yeah, we talked about that too.
Yep.
Yeah, coin clipping.
Yeah, coin clipping. So even when we're using pure gold and silver, I mean, governments are the whole point to take away, with the examples that have been given and that you talked about, is that no matter what system is in place, the people who are in power, the economic and political elites, they're looking for ways to game the system and make money on the side. And that's just, no matter what system we have in place, unfortunately, that's just going to be the way things are, I guess, because of human nature.
Do you think that's where they got the saying, shaving a little off the top?
I think they typically did the sides.
It may be. I'm not. You're putting me on the spot. I'm not familiar with that term.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that would be interesting.
I've seen the clipped coin, so it was pretty obvious, what they're trying to do, and like Rome, even they were taking silver coins. They were taking copper coins and then dipping them in silver. They come up with crazy schemes.
That's insane. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's the corruption. It's just amazing. And so many people out there actually think that the corruption is just happening now in our generation with the government. I think that's so funny because you can go back to, I mean, corruption's been going on as long as governments existed. So, I mean, there's that. But I would say that there is really, I mean, in regards to like Nixon really severing the final ties, I would say that there was no single action that Nixon has a more profound and delirious effect on the American people with. I think that this was his thing. I mean, I know the whole Watergate scandal, but I don't think that can even touch taking us off the gold standard. It can't. What do you think?
Nixon was a complicated individual. I mean, the guy who was before him, Lyndon B. Johnson, was one of the worst presidents ever. I mean, he put the United States in such bad financial situation there with the Vietnam War and the spending programs. I mean, the U.S. basically went bankrupt before, and it took the presidency of Nixon before people finally realized, with the foreign creditors starting to demand gold. So just for them to keep the game going, they had to take it off the gold standard, and then they came up with the petrodollar, which was basically, post Bretton Woods. The Bretton Woods system was where every currency was pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. The U.S. got the privilege of Bretton Woods because the U.S. was the main productive economy and the only one whose industrial base wasn't bombed. So you had Germany, Europe, Japan. They were all the major economies, including the U.S. before the Second World War, although some of them had been bombed quite a bit after the First World War. But the U.S. hadn't been bombed at all. The U.S. was the last man standing, and everyone was buying goods from the U.S. So the U.S. got to dictate terms. They abused the terms. Then they went to the petrodollar after 71.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about the petrodollar a little later in the show too. So, basically after World War II, all currencies were valued in comparison to the US dollar. And the Fed was pressured to determine the value of currencies and keep the gold price stable and just really couldn't handle it. So, that was, really the final nail in the coffin for the U.S. dollar. But the thing is that it's being held up by the petrodollar, which we're going to talk about later. But Calvin, do you want to take over talking about why the gold standard is bad? Like going off the gold standard is actually really bad? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that.
How far back do you want to go?
I'm thinking that we should, start. Where do you want to start? You can start wherever you want. I mean, I think LIBOR is a good one. Okay.
So before ICE took over, the British Bankers Association managed LIBOR. It comprised the rate from a panel of banks representing countries in each of the quoted currencies. The banks were asked what rate they would charge for a given currency in a given length of time, and the BBA trusted that the rates quoted by the banks were the actual ones. Now, in 2012, Barclays Bank was accused of falsely reporting lower rates than they were actually being offered during the period of 2005 to 2009, and as a result, it was fined $450 million, and the CEO resigned. However, Bob Diamond, the CEO, said that most other banks were doing the same thing, and the Bank of England knew about it.
Oh, yeah, it's okay, because, everybody else is doing it right.
It's amazing how much that happens, though, when you're dealing with corporatist bureaucracies, and
yeah, but they're doing it too. Everybody's doing it. It's fine, right, Jason? Everything's fine because everybody else is doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like the characters out of Atlas Shrugged, like the brother James Taggart and then Wesley Mouch and the other guy who was the other steel magnate that was competing with Hank Reardon. I forget the other guy's name who was awful at manufacturing steel and iron ore. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys, unfortunately, one of the things now that's taught in business schools, and this has sucked, this sucks is they teach rent-seeking in business schools. Instead of value creation and building your own company and making smart long-term investments, it's how to get rich quick and, how to get government contracts and, basically figure out a way to maximize profits in the short term, even if that's loading debt onto your balance sheet and you don't care what happens 5 years from now as long as you get rich in the next year or so. So
yeah.
It's just it's all an incentive problem throughout the levels of the economy, and I think it starts with fiat money and government.
Yeah, but I mean, the reason that Libor would lie about their rate is really so that it could make a higher profit, because a low Libor rate is seen as a mark that banks are more sound, and one with a higher Libor rate.
The banks want cheap capital for each other, because if you can lend cheap capital and knock the price down, there's also the over-the-counter derivatives market, Lauren. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that's over a quadrillion. The over-the-counter derivatives market, and they have bets on interest rates. So those bets on those interest rates are way more than the global economy, an order of magnitude larger than the whole global economy, and they're way larger than each individual bank balance sheet. So some of these larger banks here in the U.S., you have J.P. Morgan or others like that, they might have a couple $100 billion or so market cap, and they might have a certain amount of cash on their balance sheet, but they're betting over trillions of dollars on the over-the-counter derivatives market, and if those bets go bad, they don't have the money to cover them. So part of that's why LIBOR was triggered, is because there's these crazy derivatives casino gambling bets in the derivatives market that you almost basically need a PhD in economics or a PhD. Some of these guys that design these derivatives, some of them are PhDs in rocket science. And so when one of these things blows up, I mean, there's counterparty risk. It means more bailouts. It means more money printed that we don't know about. It's all so ridiculous. And LIBOR is just it's not the main one. It's just one of the few ones that we've actually heard about in public that has gotten out. There's been fines for manipulating the gold or silver market too, that the large banks like Barclays have been fined for manipulating. I mean, these guys are manipulating so many markets right now, it's not even funny.
Yeah. I mean, there's we talked the last show that there's one what's it called? I have it down here. It's called the Royal Mint, and they print 60 other countries' coins. I mean, there's got to be some serious manipulation there, and you're seeing that in 60 different countries, just coming out of one place.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but what I would say, though, is that most governments don't want to print gold or silver anymore because they hate it. They're all trained Keynesians. So almost everyone, this is the way the deck's been stacked. For me to even find a book about Austrian school economics, you're really there's obviously probably a few universities that have these books, but the majority, I went through an MBA program for a year before I dropped out and got disgusted about it, but they're not available in university libraries, and I think that's intentional. So you're not even going to find anything about the Austrian School of Economics, or that there's an alternative viewpoint to this mainstream Keynesian viewpoint of, central banking is good. We want an elastic money supply. We want to be able to put money in or take it out or do whatever we want with that. So it all starts, with that and the microcosm of that and the framework for manipulating markets or things like that. And the Keynesian viewpoint, if you go back and look through the general theory, there's a really good book for your listeners out there. Henry Hazlitt has basically an outline of where he goes line by line through the general theory, because a lot of it's from a libertarian perspective. It's called Failure of the New Economics. And basically, Keynes hates savers, Keynes doesn't like gold, a lot of the stuff in there. And I think the people on the mainstream financial media, the people in academia, they defend Keynes. They said, oh, he really didn't mean to say he didn't really say any of this stuff. He was much more balanced. He wouldn't have agreed to any of the stuff going on. A lot of the stuff in that book was borderline Marxist, okay? He was quoting Marx directly in a good amount of the stuff there. So at best, Keynes was fascist, which is basically the world, unfortunately, we have now in a lot of the economy, which goes to banks manipulating the interest rates so they can make money off the derivatives with LIBOR, what you just said.
Yeah, exactly. It's all just a process of manipulation. I mean, what do you think, Calvin?
Oh, absolutely.
You're quiet tonight. Can you give us your 2 cents? You're super quiet tonight.
Just one of those days.
I think we've all had one of those days.
Yep.
It is Monday. So, so I mean, there's Libor, there's a bunch of other schemes like that, which are totally capable of happening because we don't actually have any standard for our money. And I know that even when we were on a standard, we had manipulation. So really, honestly, it just comes down to government is the real problem.
Yeah, it's not what our currency is based off of, it's who's controlling it.
Yes,
and
it
when
really
it's centralized, you're going to have a problem.
Exactly. And so the root problem here, and, I'm going to get in trouble again because I keep getting in trouble from the objectivist crowd for saying it, but as long as we have government, there's going to be a problem.
And that's objectively the case.
And that is objectively the case. That's the thing, is that objectivism is about recognizing objective reality more than just, following the authority figure that we've that wrote the philosophy. It's not about what she said. It's about objective reality.
That's a pretty pronounced difference between an objectivist and a randroid, which is my new favorite word.
There you go. See, I'm no randroid. But, you'll notice, Calvin, that I wasn't the one this show to bring up objectivism. Jason actually brought it up. Yeah.
Well, there's a first for everything. Statistically, somebody was going to beat you to the punch at some point.
Well, I think I was bringing up the Atlas Shrugged reference here. Though I think we are seeing Dagny Taggarts throughout the economy here, and that's what's kept the economy going instead of outright collapsing immediately. I mean, they're working harder and harder around these rules, regulations, taxes, inflation. I mean, there's an enormous amount of inflation already in the United States, and even more than that in the developing world throughout the global economy. And basically, all these rules, regulations, taxes, it's making it tougher to create value, to create new products or services, unless you're like getting government contracts or you have the right lobbying group or things like that. It's basically out of Atlas Shrugged in that aspect. I mean, obviously we don't have situations here where everything has been completely stopped. The trains have completely stopped yet. I mean, they've made sure basically that people are still getting breads and circuses and people are still getting their money and their EBT cards. But I do see it harder though, to the point where there's more Dagny Taggarts in the economy having to work a lot harder than in the past just to keep their business afloat and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, people think that it's They think that, it's easy for these people and they work their tails off. And even without the government, they're still going to work their tails off because the market is a harsh mistress. When people decide that they like a product or don't like a product, I mean, that's just, you either compete or your business fails. I mean, it's going to be, a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's going to be easier for, them to corrupt the economy when the government's gone. No, we have the internet, first of all. So freedom of information, openness of information, easy flow of information. If a company is doing something corrupt, that's going to go up all over the internet. And good luck salvaging yourself from that. I mean, you can pay off the government to keep quiet. Good luck paying off the internet. So, yeah.
I'm curious, do you think that we're going to see some new bloom of innovation in spite of tightening bureaucracies, or do you think that inevitably innovation is going to be driven elsewhere?
Me or
Well,
Jason?
both of you.
Okay.
Oh,
Go ahead, Jason. I'll let you go first.
I do study technology investing, and I've been studying robotics a lot. Been watching a lot of robotics documentaries. There's a lot of things coming. It's a confluence of a mix of different technologies. Unfortunately, some of that investing has come from the government. I mean, there's just so much money being printed that we don't know about. My research, I found a local money manager here in the DC metro area, and he sat in on an IMF meeting, and he was basically saying that, he sat in the back, snuck in, took notes. He's libertarian. He reads Zero Hedge, and basically there were all the central bankers and all these Keynesians from all these different major economies there, and all they were saying was basically how we're lying to the public. We're printing, trillions of dollars in extra currency swaps to keep the stock market, the bond market, the real estate market up. We're giving loans to each other. So you have one bankrupt government printing currency swaps and giving free currency without this other government working, producing. For example, for your listeners, let me just explain what a currency swap is real quick, 2 minutes.
Of course.
Okay, if you're the U.S. and you're Japan, if Japan wants to,
Calvin's pulling out his watch.
I don't have a watch.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So if Japan wants to do a currency swap with the United States, the U.S. will say whatever the exchange rate is, and then Japan will get $1 trillion, and then the U.S. will get the equivalency of yen, and the U.S. won't spend the yen because they don't need it, because the U.S. has the world reserve currency, and Japan gets access to all those extra dollars that they didn't have to sell more Toyotas or more Sonys or more Hondas for to get, and then they just spend the money. So we have a lot of that already going, sloshing around. That money, it's not, people aren't going to hold that money. It's going somewhere. So it's either going into technology investing, or it's going into stocks, or it's going into real estate in nice areas like Miami or LA and things like that, or it's going into the bond market. So to answer your question about the technology market, I think there's a lot of technology for now, but if you don't have the right government-sponsored technology that they don't like, they will start to maybe force you out of the area, like with Bitcoin or things like that. You've seen Bitcoin-related businesses. I believe in the last couple of years, you've seen some of them move to Panama, some of them move to other countries already. So it's basically the government picking and choosing winners through who gets easier access to cheap capital, who gets the right rules and regulations and things like that. So there is still technological innovation, but it's not pure free market forces where the entrepreneur is getting free reign to do whatever they want. It's basically the government saying, okay, you guys, whether it's 3D printing or robotics or things, you guys are allowed to do what you want, but you Bitcoin guys, I think that's the best way to explain it right now, where the government's picking and choosing which industries get easier access to capital or which ones have easier rules and regulations in order to do innovation. And I just see that trend, continuing to strengthen in the future going forward, at least for a while, until one or more governments potentially hyperinflates. I mean, it's not just the U.S. who's printing money. I think I've tried to make that clear. It's everyone.
Yeah. So, Calvin, repeat the question for me one more time. That way I can answer it as accurately as possible.
Yes, and it will be 2 minutes this time. That was at least 3.5. The question was whether or not you think that essentially innovation will outpace government, or government will outpace innovation. At least in this country.
I think that if the government works hard enough, they might be able to quelch innovation, but I don't think that they're smart enough or active enough. I mean, they can't even figure out Bitcoin and how to regulate Bitcoin. I mean, seriously, like imagine what we're going to have in the future that they're not even going to see it coming. That's the thing about innovation. It's going to outrun government. We're going to have a technocracy. That's the way that we're going to solve this government problem. It's just going to become obsolete. The government is going to become unnecessary because of innovation, and people are just going to move away from it.
The implication being that it's not unnecessary, no?
No, it's government is completely unnecessary.
All right, good deal.
Entirely.
Just checking your anarchy cred.
Yeah, no. To say that government is a necessary evil is to say that evil is necessary. So
it's kind of beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. I posted up on my wall. Oh man, did I get in trouble for that one? So one of the other things I think what I want to cover what it is that is the biggest reason why being off the gold standard, for at least for the US dollar. I think overall it's just having a government, but for the US dollar, if we're just talking about just that, being off a gold standard is a real problem, and it's really because of inflation, obviously. And so I found this thing online. It's called the US inflation calculator, and I kind of love this thing. The basic setting, if you just go to the page, is the first one. It says if in 1913 I purchased an item for $20, then in 2014 that same item would cost $480.51. That is insane. I mean, insane. That's only 100 years, and that's like, oh my God, that's really bad. $20 to 480. That's the US currency for you. But so I like this calculator. I'm going to post it up as a link so that you guys can go play with it, because it's really fun and I had a great time with it. But domestically, we were promised that the manipulation of the quantity of value of paper dollar would avoid costly recessions, provide high employment, and produce strong economic growth. Internationally, we were promised that the devaluation of the dollar would reduce our trade deficit and improve the international competitiveness of American workers and businesses. And because trade was only 1/10 of the U.S. economy, all of this could be done while maintaining price stability. Each and every one of these promises has been broken. Since Nixon killed the gold standard, the unemployment rate has averaged over 6%, and we've suffered 3 worst recessions since the end of World War II. The unemployment rate has averaged 8.5% in 1975, almost 10% in 1982, and has been above 8.8% for more than 2 years with little evidence of any improvement ahead. And this is just the unemployment rate. This performance is horrendous compared to the post-World War II gold standard era, which lasted from 1847 to 1970. During these 21 years of economic ups and downs, unemployment averaged less than 5% and never rose above 7%. Growth, too, has slowed. Since able men and women were given the power to manipulate the quantity and value of the dollar, real economic growth has averaged 2.9% a year, more than a full percentage point slower than the 4% growth rate during the post-World War II gold standard era.
Well, that's just because they had just gotten out of World War II, which got them out of the economic mess before, right?
Don't they
Wink,
always
wink.
just blame it on war? That's what they do. They just blame it on war.
The Keynesians say war is good, though. They say it helps the economy.
Oh, yeah, they do. I mean, they sit around and say that that war helps the economy. How is that? I would love to see the math on that. How are they backing this up?
Yeah, but the Keynesians are relying on like production quotas, which are kind of, Soviet era planning. That's what they're saying. They're saying, oh, well, we produce more goods, but what if you're producing bombs and you're bombing other people, right? Maybe it makes the country that wins the war look good, but it destroys everyone else. So it's not, it's not looking at the whole global economy as a whole. It's just the Keynesians are just ridiculous. But they're the ones who are like making most of the advisements to the people in power who have the ability to make the political decisions. So it's just ridiculous. I mean, Keynes was a hardcore inflationist. People are like, oh, Keynes, like I hear on CNBC and Bloomberg, I don't know if you guys hear this, but they're basically like, oh, Keynes would have never advocated the type of inflation that we have now. When inflation was too much, Keynes would have just increased the taxes or increased the interest rates, and it would reduce the inflation. That's not what Keynes really said.
But inflation doesn't come from, flow of money. It comes from printing of money. And so they're not even looking at the source. And that's the real problem.
Well, I mean, the Keynesians, I agree. Yeah. Inflation, the increasing the money supply is the inflation, and higher prices are just the symptom of inflation. They're not the cause; they're just the effect. But
right.
I mean, the Keynesians, though, like they're so self-deluded, they only look at the prices, right? And now what they're doing, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but they've been going with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They just keep when they have too much, when the statistics for food or these types of things show too much inflation, they just change them. So they just come up with new formulas or statistics to keep figuring out how they can reduce the amount of inflation that they report, each month or every couple months for, to the in the mainstream media or financial media and things like this.
Government bureaus do that with all sorts of things, though. Like, Lauren, when you were talking about the employment rate being somewhere around 8%, if you count the people who have just stopped looking for jobs, it's closer to 16.
I know. They do that. They have you in separate categories so that they can make the unemployment rate look lower. So when people are sick and tired of looking for a job, they go into a different category and they don't include that in the unemployment rate. So a lot of people don't know that they're actually manipulating the unemployment rate. It's always higher than they say it is. So.
I agree. But if you say that in the mainstream media, you go on CNN and say that, or you go on Bloomberg or CNBC or something like that, you're a conspiracy theorist and they won't allow you back on.
Knew you were going to say conspiracy theorists. So one of the other things is that we were promised that devaluing the dollar would magically improve the competitive position of the U.S.
How's that even supposed to work?
I don't know at all. But, they make these claims and they don't have to back it up because guess what? They're the big old government and they just do whatever they want. But during the past 40 years, the dollar has fallen in value by more than 70% against the euro, German mark, and the Japanese yen. The U.S. has a modest net export surplus in 1971 before Nixon started the dollar on its downward path. Today we have $405 billion trade deficit, which is insane. And finally, the dollar has done anything but keep its value. Today, the dollar is worth less than 2 dimes in buying power compared to the pre-Nixon dollar. And with little reason to believe that the dollar will maintain even this paltry value, the average American family is left with no meaningful way to save for their children's education, their own retirement, or anything else. We experience all of this in the form of financial insecurity and well-grounded anxiety about the future. So I mean, I'm totally sick of it. Like, I'm sick and tired of inflation. I think Bitcoin will hopefully save the future. Our next show is about Bitcoin.
Speaking of, what's it down to now? Wasn't it below 200 just recently?
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. It's really, really, really depressing right now.
It's manipulated, just like gold, silver, oil are.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's under constant attack. I mean, look at the bit license.
What people don't understand, people are like, oh, who would manipulate Bitcoin? Let me just tell you, I've worked in financial services industry as a stockbroker and also an investment analyst, and I have a lot of contacts on Wall Street. People work there for a long time. If there's a huge market like Bitcoin has grown so much and people can day trade it and there's trading programs that can trade back and forth, Wall Street can figure out a way to manipulate the market to make extra money. So, are you guys familiar with high-frequency trading algorithm programs and things like that? These are computers now that trade back and forth with computers, and that's how most of the markets trade now, stocks and bonds and currencies and things like that. So now that the Bitcoin market has been around for, I don't know, over a year now, and it's a more mature market and it's a larger market, there's now interest from these Wall Street computer programmers who are really, PhD level. Some of them are rocket scientists, like I said. There's an incentive now for them to start trading the markets, which means you're going to have crazy volatility, up and down swings, and manipulation and things like that.
So
buy now.
Do you like Bitcoin?
I like the technology behind Bitcoin. I like the blockchain innovation. I think if you're buying Bitcoin for price appreciation, I don't think it's a very good investment. I mean, there's other good investments that can put money in your pocket, like rental properties or gold or silver stocks with dividends or oil stocks with dividends that are better inflation hedges that, the company's earning a profit. I'm a value investor, so it's easy for me at least, to look at revenue growth, earnings growth, profit margins, things like that. But from the technological aspect, I do really like Bitcoin. I think it does have a future, and at least the blockchain technology does. Maybe someone will come out with a better a digital currency than Bitcoin in the future. Someone will figure out an even better addition to it. But the technology itself, I think, will definitely survive regardless of what governments try to do in terms of the taxes that the U.S. government has put on it. China actually tried to completely ban Bitcoin for many of its users, and it hasn't worked so far. So, I mean, it's the U.S., instead of completely banning it, the U.S. has just put some owners, there's capital gains taxes on it now. So if your Bitcoin price goes up, you're supposed to, before you go and buy a cup of coffee or something like that with your Bitcoin, you're supposed to keep track of your tax bill, which is kind of ridiculous. Right.
Yeah, people are totally going to do that. I have no doubts.
Yeah, because, I mean, they're not already stealing our money. So, I really would like the opportunity to be able to keep track of my money so I can give them even more of it.
Well, the goal, guy, I'm not sure, the goal, guys, I think for a lot of the people in power, the government bureaucrats and things, and I listened to someone from the Tax Foundation, at an International Students for Liberties conference a couple years ago. They basically said we can eliminate the income tax. We can take it down to zero. We can put a 2 or 3% VAT tax on every good or service, which sounds good to me, right? Because then there's the incentive now for entrepreneurs and businesses to invest back in the United States and create jobs. And they said that would cover more than the amount of taxes that are brought in now from income taxes. So you'd have the incentive for large corporations and businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs to invest back in the United States and create jobs. But the people who are running Congress, who are blind ideologues, hardcore progressives, Marxists, people who hate the businessmen and things like that, they would never allow that. Because they would say this 2 or 3% on food or all these things, it would hurt the poor disproportionately more, and they shouldn't be taxed at all. That's the idea. We're battling, guys. We're looking at reality. We're looking at, what would fix the economy and fix inflation and things like that. But we're battling people who have a blind ideology, who basically a lot of them hate business people. They don't want profits. They hate profits. They hate business people. The funny thing is, a lot of them, are buying gold and silver behind the closed doors, and they're getting, they're day trading on stocks. Some of these guys who say they hate business people, they're making, in Congress, they're doing insider stock trading, and they're making tons of money off trading stocks. That, by the way, with inside information that if you and me traded on this information, you and me would be in prison on a felony charge for a very long time, but they get an exemption from Congress. So these people are all hypocrites and liars and scumbags.
Criminal
they don't think the rules
thugs. Professional thugs. Yep. So, Jason, I was wondering, do you know, I mean, you're a smart guy. You know lots of stuff. Do you know how many financial crises we've had, since we were taken off the gold standard?
There's one about every 7 to 10 years since we've been taken off the gold standard.
Yep, there has been exactly 12. Yeah, that's like a really big number for in regards to financial crisis.
It doesn't surprise me because I can name a ton of different examples where I've talked to some of my friends who worked on Wall Street, whether it's the 90s, Asian tiger crisis, and the Federal Reserve printed out money to bail out Asian banks and Asian governments, or the tequila crisis where the Federal Reserve bailed out the Mexican government in the 90s. I mean, there's just so many examples of where, there is so much dollars floating around. Like, the average American does not understand. There's over $9 trillion floating around outside the United States. This is just money that, has been paid for some of its drug money, there's just so much of it for so many illicit, crazy things that would blow your mind. Like, the stuff with Iraq, so much money was paid off in bribes. Just so that way, our troops wouldn't get shot and murdered and things like it. It's mind blowing, all the different examples.
Yeah. So, 12 financial crises. And so, you hear a lot of people say that the economy is going to collapse.
Why
I mean,
hasn't it?
that's the common thing, right? Everybody's like, the economy is going to collapse. And you know why it hasn't collapsed? It's a really good question. It is, first of all, because besides the United States, the U.S. currency is also used in British overseas territories, the British Virgin Islands, and Turks and Caicos Islands, I think is how you say it. But the really big reason is because of the petrodollar, which is something that you mentioned earlier, Jason. And I think it's really important that we go over what the petrodollar is first so our audience can kind of figure out what it is. So, of course, in 1971, Richard Nixon was forced to close the gold window. Forced. That's, that's Wikipedia
done.
For you.
If we're being honest, it was already pretty much
yeah,
done.
I guess he's kind of forced in that situation. But he was taking the U.S. off the gold standard and setting into motion a massive devaluation of the U.S. dollar. In an effort to prop up the value of the dollar, Nixon negotiated a deal with Saudi Arabia that in exchange for the arms and protection that they would dominate all future oil sales in U.S. dollars. Subsequently, the other OPEC countries agreed to similar deals, thus ensuring a global demand for U.S. dollars and allowing the U.S. to export some of its inflation. Since these dollars did not circulate within the country, they were not part of the normal money supply. Economists felt another term was necessary to describe the dollars received by petroleum exporting countries in exchange for oil. So the term petrodollar was coined by Georgetown University economics professor Ibram Oasis.
Ibram Owais.
Ibram Owais. Okay. So, the petrodollar has been holding up U.S. currency. The U.S. currency cannot collapse because it is held up by this false sense of what am I trying to say here? It's held up falsely. It's a fake security for the U.S. dollar just because it's demanded all over the world, but yet it wouldn't have that demand if it didn't have a monopoly. See, this is the problem with monopolies on oil. You can't trade unless you trade in U.S. dollars for oil. What do you guys think?
For now.
Yeah.
That's due to change.
Oh, yes. And we'll talk about that just in a minute. But I'm going to let Jason kind of weigh in because he mentioned the petrodollar.
Well, the petrodollar was created to keep the dollar afloat, like you mentioned, after Bretton Woods collapsed. And it kind of pseudo put it kind of about a commodity type of currency there. It wasn't a gold standard, but it was kind of an oil standard where, we had the world's largest oil producers, the Saudis. They were backing us. The Saudis were reinvesting their oil profits back into the U.S. Treasury market and investing in other investments here in the United States. So the petrodollar has made it to where almost all the important commodities in the world, whether it's food, commodities, agriculture commodities, gold or silver, or oil, these things all have to be traded for in dollars. So even if you're buying another commodity on a foreign exchange outside the U.S. markets, it's still quoted in dollars. You still have to do dollar transactions. World trade, the dollar as world reserve currency, which is the dollar as world reserve currency, which we're on a dollar standard now, and the petrodollar are tied hip for hip. It creates artificial demand for dollars. What that means then, as you mentioned, is there's so many dollars outside the United States. Well, these banks and these central bankers and the people that facilitate a lot of world trade, they have to hold in reserves a lot of U.S. dollars, a lot more than they normally would. And that's because, they don't know if they're going to need to buy any oil, or they don't know if they're going to need to bail out their own government or their own banking system. And if they hold too much of the wrong currency and they're betting on the wrong currency, their reserves could be worth not as much. But what you're seeing now is that so many dollars have been exported. The U.S. has drastically abused the privilege. See, obviously, there wasn't over $9 trillion when this petrodollar thing started. No. People are like, okay, fine, we'll let the U.S. do it. It's not, they're not printing, doing these quantitative easing programs and all these other crazy money printing programs. They didn't. After the 2008 crisis, did you guys see how much money the Federal Reserve bailed out to all the foreign governments, the one-time audit with Ron Paul?
How much was it?
It was a one-time audit, and it was only a partial audit, and so it's not the full number, but over $16 trillion was handed out to U.S. and foreign corporations, other foreign governments, and also other foreign central banks to keep the whole system afloat after 2008.
That's absurd.
So
that is absurd.
So we don't know the exact number. Could be 60 trillion, could be 90 trillion. But what we do know is that 16 trillion was printed off in 2008 immediately, just to keep everything from collapsing, mostly because of the derivatives market and the banking system that was drastically over leveraged and didn't have any money in reserve to cover their losses. So it's just really amazing. The petrodollar, though, the one thing, though, that I would say is that these other countries are starting to get really fed up. So they've had so much inflation. You mentioned this earlier. They're starting to get really fed up with the status quo. The U.S. military is doing really crazy stuff, with destabilizing countries. So they're starting to talk with China. They're starting to trade with each other. They're looking for different alternatives to this. So I don't think the petrodollar is going to last for much longer.
Nope.
Because these other countries and their own governments, they've had enormous inflation, and they don't trust the dollar or U.S. politicians as much as they used to in the past.
Yeah. So the biggest leader in that movement is Russia. I mean, Russia is just really, they're fed up with it. And so Russia's kind of leading the movement away from the petrodollar. So basically the U.S. Politicians started slapping economic sanctions on Russia, and they probably never even imagined that there might be some serious consequences for the United States. But now the Russian media is reporting that the Russian Ministry of Finance is getting ready to pull the trigger on a de-dollarization plan. So, I mean, this is already in motion. I mean, the petrodollar is going. It's out. And once that happens, I think that the cries for there's about to be an economic collapse, because everybody keeps predicting a few more years. But this is the only thing that I know of that is holding up the U.S. dollar. And we are about to see Bitcoin's about to be a big deal. Like, I would invest now because seriously, and gold and silver and physical assets and anything you can get your hands on right now, because the US dollar, anything you're holding will be like fuel for a fire. So Germany.
Yeah.
Think Germany.
People should, exactly. I think people should be looking to not try to time this market perfectly, and they should be looking to diversify their assets out of, U.S. treasuries and U.S. dollars. You don't want to be holding a lot of those in the long term. Maybe if you're going to hold them temporarily to look for something better to buy. But to add to your point there about gold and silver, I mean, I don't know any market that's not completely sponsored by the government. Maybe solar or maybe wind or something, right, where the government is throwing billions of dollars at it, and they let these companies run at enormous losses, and they don't care if they make a profit. But the gold and silver companies are not being sponsored by the government, right? And they're mining this metal at enormous, larger and larger losses. So this is not sustainable. It's not a market where you can continually have every company in the industry produce the product at larger and larger losses. It's not sustainable. So I think buying gold, buying physical metal or silver as savings or insurance for when the system does collapse, to give an exact date on when the system does collapse, it's impossible. There's so much manipulation and stuff going on behind the scenes that people like you and me, we're never going to find out most of the truth. I mean, I mentioned the one-time audit of the Fed. I mean, and that's just like, look at all the hard work Ron Paul to do just to get a partial audit.
Yeah, the media.
So,
the media is not covering Russia's de-dollarization plan. This is not something that people know about. This is hard to follow. Like, they're not going to let us know. So you need to act now, because what do you think, Calvin? You think this is like the nail in the coffin? Russia's going to put the nail in the coffin for the U.S. economy?
Well, there will come a reckoning, that's for sure. It could be Russia. If it's not, it'll be someone else down the line.
Well, China actually has way more bargaining power with the U.S. than Russia does, because China is holding so much of our debt and things like that. China produces so many cheap goods that really the U.S. economy couldn't function without the Chinese doing the hard work and the manufacturing, producing most of our actual physical goods. So but Russia and China together is interesting. I don't know if you guys have noticed this if you pay attention to the commodity markets, but really since the Russia stories have been coming out, like those Russia stories you mentioned have been coming out the last couple weeks, some of Russia's main commodities that they produce, they've been down drastically. So platinum, palladium, oil, natural gas. The uranium price, I'm not sure if it's dropped, but gold has dropped. So all of the main things that Russia produces that Russia's economy is dependent on, the paper prices of all these things have just been hammered. Yeah. So maybe it's the U.S., financial warfare and retaliating, saying to Russia, if you do this, we're going to knock your commodity prices down. We're going to really hurt your economy.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think, especially with China, perhaps less so with Russia, but same question, could they seriously devalue the U.S. dollar, destroy the American economy without inflicting a pretty powerful blow on themselves?
It's an interesting question. It really depends how much in paper treasury reserves you think China has at this point. I've interviewed for my own channel on YouTube and our iTunes. I've interviewed over 250 different experts, and their opinions vary. I interviewed Jim Rickards. We're going to interview him again this week, and he got hired by the CIA to do research in terms of like market manipulation, and he wrote this best-selling book called Currency Wars. So he travels all over the world speaking with central banks and governments. He's libertarian-leaning. I wouldn't call him full libertarian, but he's definitely more of a Hayek type of libertarian. Anyways, though, what I would say is that a lot of experts think that China has already started hedging themselves drastically, and China has a lot more they might not have as much gold as the U.S., but they're almost there. So in his new book called The Death of Money, Jim Rickards talks about how through his own contacts he found out that the Chinese military last year smuggled in over 500 tons of physical gold through the border that wasn't reported on an exchange or anything. So that China's doing oil deals, out of the dollar. They're securing long-term oil supply and things like that. I think China is very astute. I don't think they're going to get caught off guard. They have a lot of Wall Street people and really well-educated professionals who are educated outside of China here in the United States who do things behind the scenes. I don't think they're going to get caught off guard where, China's holding all this paper treasuries and they're all going to go to zero without China being hedged with physical gold or silver or oil or things like that.
Yeah, I agree. But what do you think, Calvin?
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, it's not much more to say than that. So I think we're going to go ahead and end the show. I want to give Jason a chance to pitch all of his stuff. But first, I'm going to tell you guys next week we are going to be covering Bitcoin and basically everything about Bitcoin. And we want to get a bunch of really cool Bitcoiners on the show. So we're working on that. And then we have a big announcement next show for what our next series will be.
I think we already announced it, didn't we?
Well, we did. We talked about the fact that we're going to talk about the presidents, but we didn't tell them the really big news, which we will tell you next show. But anyway, so, Jason, do you want to go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you and what you're up to?
Sure. They can find my work at wallstreetformainstreet.com, which is WALLSTFORMANST.com. We're a startup investor education, financial education, market research, and consulting company. We created our company with the purpose of people who want to learn how to invest for themselves, who want to learn to fish for themselves. So people who are interested in learning about the Austrian school of economics and how it applies to investing in different markets, value investing, different types of investing, and the different skills for investing, we teach those types of skills. And we're also working on upgrading our website and raising capital on Indiegogo, so where we can install virtual classrooms so people can pay on either subscription model or per class model. They can learn how to invest on one website. So if you want to learn how to invest in real estate, in different types of real estate, or in stocks, and learn Austrian school economics, all in the same place. It's going to be on a subscription model, and it's going to be experts teaching the classes, and you're going to get a chance to interact with some of these amazing contacts that I've had the chance to interview throughout the last number of years on our YouTube channel and on our iTunes channel. I'm also working on another project. It's for the U.S. retail investor, so they get because the average U.S. retail investor cannot afford to buy their own organic farmland and start farming, which I think is also a good inflation hedge. So besides precious metals and oil and rental properties and things like that, I really believe in people being able to own some farmland or something like that. So I'm working on an investment vehicle to bring to the average person on Main Street in the U.S. so they can buy shares in an organic farm that has like grass-fed beef and antibiotic-free chicken and organic fruits and vegetables, and they have access to profits and dividends from those types of things.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you're working on so much stuff. I mean, I guess I don't really have much room to talk, but, you know, I think the only other person I've talked to that had that big of an outro was MK. So, you, me, and MK, man, we're just doing our thing. So, Calvin, where can they find you?
You can find me on liberty.me. I write about all sorts of things, liberty in pop culture, liberty in religion on occasion. Yeah, check it out.
Ooh, that's controversial. And you can find me at objectivistgirl.com, or Objectivist Girl on Facebook is the best place to find me. Also, you can find my YouTube channel at youtube.com/objectivistgirl, and girl is without the I. Long story.
Girl.
Objectivist Girl. And then, of course, you can check out my live show on Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're having the guys that do Uncle Santa on the show this week, so you guys should definitely check that out. And finally, you can check out True Objective at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every single Monday.
8-ish.
8-ish. Yeah, it's always kind of ish. Anyway, so 8-ish on Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And remember, guys, knowledge is not for all men, but for those who seek it. So keep seeking.